So to make it simple, you brought up that principle earlier. I believe in the principle of simplicity, but not being simplistic. Simplicity as a way to understand and explain things that's sufficient, that's adequate, that's complete, and maybe no more. But maybe more examples sometimes come into play. But so in terms of simplicity, in this case, footwork, I would say, has two. And I'll use, again, this philosophical dialectic. It's not just Chinese, but this or that, yin and yang, duality, right? And so in this context, because you mentioned stability and mobility, so that's already a dialectic, a yin and a yang, right? So yin, we say, is more stillness, so that would be more stability, right? And then yang is more active movement, so I would say mobility, okay? So we have yin, we have yang, we have stillness, we have motion. Stability and mobility. And to make it more technical, I can throw into these two columns. In the yin column, static, stillness, stationary, stability, stance. Okay, your stances. In Chinese martial arts, we say ma, or ma, horse, right? And then in the yang category of mobility, right, motion, flexibility, adaptability, right? We can say step, so which is bu or bo, right, in Cantonese or Mandarin. So actually in Chinese, we say ma bu, ma bu, ha bu. Right? You'll see that in whatever, Kung Fu glossary, Kung Fu books, ma bu, right, in Cantonese. So I think to the layman, right, or to a beginner, they might think that that's one term, ma bu, ma bu. Okay, do your ma bu, ma bu. However, I want to make a distinction that they're exactly how you kind of ask the question, and I'm kind of putting into this container of terminology, right, and technique. Stance should be maximally stable, and step should be optimizing movement, right? So I would say stance as long as you can, as long as it's relevant, as long as you're in advantageous position, right? And when you must, due to some reason, right, internal or external, move, then you want to optimize your transition, right, to another strong position, right? So it's like ma, bu, ma, bu, ma, bu, stand, step, stand, step, stand, steps. Or if I kind of make a rhythm, it's not so equal, right? Sometimes stands, step, step, stand, step, 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 stands, right? So sometimes you're in the stance for a couple seconds and then a quick step or two, and then maybe a quick stance that has to change again, right? So it becomes almost, I use another metaphor we talked about. I mean, it's like language too. It would be very boring and ineffective if my communication was like the same tone and same speed. As you can tell, when I get excited, it's high and low, loud and quiet. And so I think in other kind of dynamic situation, not verbal communication, but in a way martial communication, maybe it's argument, that because of the variability of the other person coming at you, right? That sometimes you're in a stance more, but sometimes you're in stepping mode more, right? And I would say yes. Overstancing, right? We usually say overstep. Don't overstep, right? Overstancing is not relevant because, or is bad, or is dangerous because when you should move and you don't move, right? Then it could be problematic, right? Let's say someone is coming at you, like trying to tackle you, right? And you're like, oh, my stance, is so strong, right? Yes, maybe compared to an untrained person, like they would just get knocked over within, a second. And if you're trained, right, maybe you can hold it, right, for 2 seconds or 3 seconds because of more groundedness. But it's still a lot of momentum, but you're like, no, I'm a stancer, right? And you get knocked over, right? Versus if you would have changed your stance, right, like at 2.5 seconds rather than overstancing, then you would have been able to preserve your structure and not get knocked over, right? I mean, you think of like a bull, right? Like the bull shouldn't just be, the matador, I mean, this is not the most savory example, shouldn't just be running around the arena, right? This matador is standing there, right? But when the bull is coming at them, at some point, it's kind of like they say, right? Wait for it, still stance, keep your stance, and then now maybe you move, right? Or you step, change your stance. I mean, change of stance in a way is what I'm calling step, right? It doesn't always require moving your feet, but you can sometimes turn, right? But that's a stance change, right? Now, so that's called overstancing, right? Standing too long, stationary position too long. You move your car, move your position. You're gonna get bombed on, right? So the other is you can say overstepping, right? It's kind of like you said about you mentioned Bruce Lee, but for the movies, it would be boring, right?
Yeah.
It'd be boring if like just standing there, like the guy's not moving for even 30 seconds, right? It's like. Right? So in the movie, of course, or in entertainment, right, and like competition, right, or if there's aesthetics, you need to maybe do more stepping, right? But there's such thing as unnecessary stepping, and I know some people, when they're jumping around, they see that as necessary because it's kind of tricky, you're kind of keeping in your flow, right? And you're kind of throwing off the opponent. It's like, hey, look over there, and then you go that way. kind of tricky, like or maybe you just like to dance. I don't know. But in terms of energy, right? Talking about efficiency, economy of movement or energy. Yeah, there's such thing as too much, right? Too much yang, right? As well as too much yin on both sides, right? So I think a good martial artist is being able to balance, like when standing is relevant and effective, don't need to move. Right? You can strike from that position or defend from that position. Right? When stepping becomes advantageous, right? And it could be like half a second later, right? Then you turn your body or step to another direction. So I would say that efficiency, okay, is good, but not efficiency meaning prioritizing stances. Prioritizing not moving. To me, that's not efficiency. Maybe I'm talking about efficacy, which is like stance is great, but to have a bias, I think is a bit dangerous in this context, right? Because it depends on, again, the context of the opponent. If the opponent is bigger, is more momentum or faster, then you may step more, right? But if the opponent is slower or is not so dynamic, is not changing directions, so you don't have to step or change your stance to face them, then you may be more in stance. Yeah. So again, it's contextual. And I think therefore, 50-50, like train your stances. And there are ways to train it, right? Like, in a non kind of self-defense context, like train your stance. In Wing Chun, we have these basic stances, but all martial arts do. I think you should be able to stand statically with pressure. If someone is pushing on your stance, right? Whether your arm or your hips or your shoulder, that's good stance training to be able to withstand pressure, right? Because stances are for that. And whereas steps, you can do more dynamic training, like the opponent is feeding you from the left side or the right side or coming towards you or backing away. That's stance training. But both are very important, equally important. In a way, steps begin and end in a stance. So how can you say, like stepping is more important, right, than stances? They depend on each other, right? And steps allow you to move from one stance to another, right? So
yeah.